With just less than 2 days left before the year, 2024 comes to an end, and it will certainly go down as one of the most eventful and politically charged period in the 30 years of South Africa's democracy. From the anticipated national and provincial general elections on the 29th of May to the formation of the Government of National Unity that created a shift in the political party climate. And although there were some breakthroughs, including Eskom reaching over 9 months without load shedding, the year was also marred by the deaths of over 20 children as a result of foodborne illnesses, in some cases after they had allegedly consumed snacks from spaza shops. And so as we continue to reflect on the year that was for 2024 this morning, we're going to be looking back at some of the pivotal events that shaped our country. And for that, we're joined virtually by Tshepo Matseba, Managing Director at Reputation First Group. Tshepo, good morning, and thank you for joining us on the SABC at this hour.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Look, to start things off, it has been a plenty 24. And as a South African, how would you define the year 2024 from your vantage point?
No, I mean, it's been an eventful year, particularly on a number of strikes. But importantly, the South Africa's challenge at the International Criminal Court, or the World Court, at which we were trying to have a conversation about the Middle East, and particularly the situation in Palestine. And I think that has helped position South Africa very, very positively in the international markets, both in a political sense, but also as an environment that lives for peace, and that espouses the promises that were made by the founders of our democracy, former President, the late President Nelson Mandela, that we live the values of Ubuntu and collectivism holistically. So I think that actually case at the ICJ really positions South Africa at the center stage of global news headlines, global dialogue, and created a far more investor-friendly sentiment and media-friendly sentiment. And then there were elections, of course, and all the events running up towards our elections. I think that has been pivotal, especially issues that happened before, during, and after elections. The fast tracking of the MK party, and then the DA, or Democratic Alliance, banning the South African flag as in a symbolic way to demonstrate the failures in governance in our country. That was an eventful milestone. And the events that we've seen post-elections with the Speaker of Parliament actually stepping down from a role and eventually being charged for corruption. So it's been a very, very complex year, both politically and in governance. And I think there are many other events and stories to touch on, especially the first 3 months of 2024, where we were still battling load shedding, and how it came to an end on the 20th of March. I think the period between January and March was the most difficult in terms of the energy crisis in the country.
Tshepo, I know that there's so much to condense in these few minutes, but thank you for speaking to some of those standout moments for the country. I mean, who can forget that the country also marked 30 years of democracy? And so, given what has transpired, the highs and the lows, do we have much to celebrate? Do we have much to celebrate about at this point, especially as we're going to navigate 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot to celebrate. South Africa is still part of AGOA, the opportunity that presents by the US for preferential procurement. And investors, much unlike what most people anticipated or predicted, that the investors would leave the country in droves. Actually, most investors are remaining in South Africa. If you look at the automotive sector, Chinese companies are investing in South Africa. American companies are reinvesting in South Africa and putting more and more resources in the country. And we've seen South Africa's participation at the World Economic Forum really cementing its place as an active participant in geopolitics. And importantly, South Africa's participation within BRICS. And lastly, if you look at the fact that this year, South Africa is actually now takes over the presidency of the G20, and that just demonstrates that we are a country that is functional, that we are a going concern. And despite that, although we have had some very, very chilling moments in terms of crime and corruption in our country, then I think that remains a big challenge, a major challenge that still needs to be addressed by the state security agencies, but also by society, so that we play a collective role, by business, so that we play a collective role in tackling crime, violent crimes, and corruption.
Tshepo, let's get into that. In fact, crime and justice as the center talking point at this point, because we saw the Senzomiwa murder trial concluding. We also saw the disappearance of Jocelyn. That trial continues into 2025. What's reflected on that front?
Yeah, I mean, it just tells you that, if you look at the Senzomiwa case, that case has got domestic interest, less international interest in terms of media coverage and global sentiment. Citizens are concerned about the slow pace of the case, the inconsistencies and loss of lives around this specific case. So I think South Africans are actually waiting, to have this case concluded. But when you look at social media and domestic sentiment, people don't trust the justice system when they observe the manner in which things are unfolding within that specific Senzomiwa trial. And then when you look at the kidnappings, especially kidnappings of children. That story you referenced now made it internationally, and it sends really a negative signal worldwide that we are still a place or environment that is open for criminals to thrive and criminality to thrive. The Justin story really is a very sad one, the one that has impacted people perception-wise, impacted the country adversely in Europe, in China especially, where in those environments in China, one crime is one too many. And I think it's a case that we need to watch, and that the justice system needs to move swiftly and demonstrate that we have intelligence in the country, and actually get to a point where we get to finality about what actually happened to the young girl.
Yeah, because justice delayed is justice denied. Another issue that came to the fore just this morning, there are also more allegations related to the incident. Government being criticized about how it handled the deaths of over 20 children as a result of foodborne illnesses. In some cases, it came after they allegedly consumed snacks from spaza shops. What more could have been done better? How could we also further create, how could this further create chaos for brand South Africa, particularly as we're edging closer to the G20 and what's set to come from that for the country?
Yeah, you will note that it's very difficult if you are a South African and you go to a market like Nigeria to set up a spaza shop or a business. You have to go through a rigorous process to get established. You can't simply go in and set up. Our environment has created a space for individuals and groups to simply set up without following any due legislative process. And that's what has resulted in the situation that we are in, where we are now closing these spaza shops. But we've lost too many lives. And the sad part is that we don't seem to have the capacity or ability to anticipate these issues. A few years ago, as Minister of Finance, I believe, Tito Mboweni actually referenced the fact that spaza shops ought to be registered. He actually made an appeal, and he was in Parliament. I don't think that plea was taken seriously. It was probably taken as rhetoric during parliamentary discussions. But now we've lived to see that reality. And then it contributes to sensitivities within the SADC region, where a lot of foreign nationals who may be participating in South Africa's economy may feel that they are now becoming victims of attacks, victims of perhaps what they deem to be xenophobia, while South Africa is actually addressing the pertinent issues where people are operating businesses illegally, and they operate in South Africa without the relevant documentation, thereby placing us at risk. But you would have seen that also some of the major chains, such as, and I'll reference this specific one because it's a recent case, Shoprite, somewhere in Soweto, has been actually given a fine because of the reality of selling expired goods. And there are many, many other warehouses and shops where consistency in terms of monitoring and compliance is not adhered to. And South Africa has a lot more to do to reframe this proposition, especially for the domestic market, for the South African citizen who needs to buy goods and services every day and looks at the shops around them with a bit of risk and sadness because they don't know what they may be consuming at a particular point in time. So compliance and monitoring, I think will be a defining moment for South Africa's governance systems, for companies that are operating, that are selling to these spaza shops, so that we can create a better positioning for the country, but also save lives and serve our people.
Well, Tshepo, just as we wrap up there, I mean, who can force, just staying on the issue of business and the economy and finance, Takatso, the SAA Takatso Consortium deal being finalized, that was also, something to look forward to, and perhaps also looking at how that's going to impact the economy and also assist the airline as well. But the story of Tintswalo, we saw that with that narrative and with that debate, the gaps between the haves and the have-nots coming to the fore, the triple threats of poverty, unemployment and inequality. How was that narrative managed as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting journey. I think President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his speech, really attempted to tell a story of South Africa through this character or persona called Tintswalo. And to an extent, he told that story during the moment, but that unpacked a whole lot of other different dynamics where South Africans were saying, but when you actually look at the story of Tintswalo, it shows the pains of South Africa, that Tintswalo has not actually performed very well when you look at the high levels of unemployment, especially youth unemployment, and the number of young people who are not in education, not in employment, and not seeking employment, and who have actually given up hope completely. And then when you look at the level of crime and violent crimes on our roads, violent crimes in our homes, and the number of women who are killed every day in our country, and the fact that on average about 7,000 people die through violent crimes every quarter, demonstrate that Tintswalo has not necessarily performed. And that narrative actually ended up in a sort of a bad taste within the population of South Africa, citizenry, living citizens confused about the reality between the haves and have-nots, and the extent to which there has been genuine, authentic progression, especially when you look at the fact that Tintswalo, some of the Tintswalos don't even have homes to this day. Their grandmothers still live in deep shacks. And when you reflect on Tintswalo and you look at what happened in Hammanskraal with the water crisis, that just demonstrates that the story of Tintswalo was probably a little bit less, more tone deaf and less realistic.
Well, Tshepo, 2024 has certainly set this tone for 2025 and beyond. We're optimistic and hopeful about what we can expect, given the opportunities on the horizon. But for now, let's leave the conversation there. Tshepo Matseba, Managing Director at Reputation First Group, this morning, giving us his analysis as we review and just wrap some of the events that shaped South Africa this year.